I'm Cantor Kate Judd. I'm Phyllis's sister-in-law. I was married to Phyllis's older brother of blessed memory. And I have the great honor of opening and closing our ceremony today. I want to begin. I'm going to sing the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew, not because Phyllis was attached to Judaism any more than she was attached to any other spirituality, but because that is what I know, and she was a great supporter of my path. But I want to invite you, if you know the 23rd Psalm in any version, in English, I'm going to recite it first. I'm going to do good old King James because I really think that's what Phyllis would have preferred. But feel free to join me if you know it in any version whatsoever. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Amen. so happy to have everybody here today. I'm Lori Sims, and Phyllis referred to me as her replacement, as I took her place when she retired from Western. And this was a very interesting position to have. Phyllis absolutely introduced me to this community where I've now lived for 22 years and enjoyed a really fantastic life. Phyllis's introductions, as most of you will know, went something like this. Well, you know Lori Sims, don't you? And then it would follow with something like, well, she's a very fancy pianist. And therefore, we have the fancy on the program because Phyllis was, in fact, the most fancy of all. I had the honor of throwing her 80th birthday party for her. That was a surprise party. And the 90th birthday party, which many of you probably attended last year, was intended to be a surprise as well, but as all good things sometimes leak out, it became not a surprise. And so Phyllis was on the phone immediately to make sure that things were going to go down the way she would like. So we sort of co-curated the program. I mean, it was a magnificent thing that at 90 years old that she could remember absolutely exactly the performances that meant so much to her and the people who played them and when they happened and where they played. And that part of it was great to be able to find all those people and have them participate. Now, when she called me in October and was deeply concerned that no one was going to come, and why were the invitations out, I was a little worried that neither of us was going to make our next birthdays. In any case, it's noteworthy that Phyllis really considered that 90th birthday concert, I think, her living funeral. It was something that meant so much to her, and you see the picture on the front of the program, how beautifully happy and glowing she is, and it was a really meaningful thing. So this gathering that we have today is actually for us. And there was a tremendous outpouring, as you can imagine. Somebody who has spent, I think I looked it up, 788,000 hours on this planet, and somebody with as much of a huge spirit and humor and unbelievable generosity, as well as all of the other talents that she brought, certainly caused a pretty big outpouring of people wanting to speak, and they wrote beautiful things, which I have collected, and lots of people who wanted to play. And again, in line with Phyllis's ideal, she did not like a long program, ever. She would be the first to tell you if it had gone over a little bit. So I decided rather than, I'd like Phyllis to speak for herself, so we have, by the graciousness of some people who submitted some wonderful photographs and videos and the music library. This will be about Phyllis today and a chance for us to share in some of these wonderful things. I think the videos, the content is great, but it's more about listening to that inimitable and absolutely hysterical way she had of speaking about everything, but also so deep and so personal. So I really hope that this will help you to enjoy all the things that we all loved about Phyllis. Thank you.
I went to Queens College because it was there. I lived 15 minutes away, and it didn't cost anything because it was part of the city school system. And it just happened to have a great music department. Largely because when I went to school, it was in the late 40s, and the faculty was populated with refugees from Europe. Some of whom were really well known. So I got a great education there, really wonderful. I had never sung in a choir, I had never played chamber music. I didn't know anything except how to play the piano. So it was wonderful.
And what was your first?
Good afternoon, or You wouldn't necessarily think of Phyllis as a frightening person. A mere 5 feet, maybe 90 pounds, devoting herself to the fine arts. Nor would you necessarily think of Phyllis as a funny person, someone with an outrageous sense of humor capable of making a crowd burst out in laughter with a single quip. But every time I think about Phyllis, I feel the loving stings of her very special rebukes, and it makes me want to laugh out loud. But more than the stories we can all share about her unique forms of expression, her fierce independence or entrenched opinions on certain subjects, she embodied an incredible energy for life and love for the people around her. Phyllis was an intensely serious and passionate person. As a pianist, when she performed, every note was a pearl in its proper place at the precise dynamic with the precise rhythm and articulation, and there was always a sense of how informed each performance was by the historical context and her vast understanding of how composers think. And when she taught, all of this knowledge and focus was brought to bear on doe-eyed students who barely knew what key they were in. But the presence of such innocence and naivete did not have the slightest effect on how Phyllis might respond if you were to come in even the slightest bit unprepared. Well, that was a disaster, she might say, or Beethoven is rolling over in his grave right now. But somehow, I never took offense, at least not for long. And I have the sense that neither did my colleagues, judging from the many hilarious conversations we had, piecing together our collective memories of her colorful vocabulary. There was something in the tone of her voice when she came after you that was humorous and at the same time caring, never with malice, and you knew without a doubt that her only focus was to help you to grow. You felt nurtured in her care. Phyllis was more than a piano teacher to our family. She was family. She and my father's tenure at Western Michigan was almost identically concurrent. Phyllis started 5 years earlier, but they retired in the same year. She was coming over to the house when I was only an infant and had been a constant presence in our family's life from that time on. I remember how fond she was of both my parents and what care she took to perform so much of my dad's music. My father's music, as many of you know, is not for the faint of heart, but Phyllis never hesitated to take on a performance and deliver with the utmost clarity and care. My dad had the utmost respect for her musicianship and was always awed by what she was able to do, often in relatively short periods of time due to her uncanny sight-reading abilities. I have one very special memory of a solo piano piece my dad wrote called Fantasia, without an intended performance. He had a couple of prospects, but things never panned out, and it seemed as if this one was only going to exist in his head. But one evening, at a party at Phyllis's house for an occasion I can't remember, Phyllis gathered everyone around the piano to perform this work of my dad's for him. Although I can't remember the occasion, I can still remember how incredibly moved we were all by this, and my dad was moved to tears. These were the moments when we saw the full extent of Phyllis's love. You always felt it, but there were times where it was simply overwhelming. Phyllis became my piano teacher when I was 16, and I studied with her through my first year in college, at which point I felt a calling to see life outside of Kalamazoo and moved to Chicago to study at Northwestern. I learned many incredible things from Phyllis, too numerous to recount here, but awareness of the musicians around me and the ability to really listen was one of the greatest. I also inherited her emphatic, upbeat sniff that still gets a hearty chuckle every time I play with musicians to this day. What I never did fully learn, though, was how to interpret Mozart to her satisfaction. So in 1994, I gave my senior recital and performed, among other things, the Prokofiev Third Piano Concerto, a piece I had been dying to play since I was a teenager. Phyllis came all the way to Chicago for that performance, and after it was over, told me how proud she was that I was finally able to perform this war horse I had been dreaming about for so long. Then I made my fatal mistake. What did you think of the Mozart, Phyllis? Phyllis replied, do you really want to know? No, I didn't. But I'd give anything to hear her say it again with that mischievous smirk on her face. My last encounters with Phyllis, though, are by far more meaningful than I could have ever imagined. Both of my parents passed away this year, and needless to say, it was a difficult time for me and my family and all who knew my parents. I'm sure it was a difficult loss for Phyllis, too, but I would never have known it because all of her love and attention was focused on how I was doing. She wouldn't leave me alone. She called, she wrote, she called again. She came all the way to Chicago for my mother's funeral, after which she had her own health issues, being admitted to the emergency room for something akin to an afibrillation. And then a mere 3 days after being released, was desperately trying to find a way to attend my father's funeral. She downplayed her health issues as if they weren't serious, but I told her it really wasn't necessary to come and that probably she shouldn't. But she was insistent. I'm not coming for your father, I'm coming for you. Funerals aren't for the dead, they're for the living. In the end, we were not able to find her a ride, but she sent another letter and called when it got sent back for having the wrong apartment number on it. She told me she knew how hard all this must be for me and that she loved me. I love you too, I told her. I don't know that we'd ever said that to each other, but I never knew a time when it wasn't true. Phyllis loved us all, in her own very special way. Sometimes she loved us by correcting us. Sometimes she loved us by delivering an unexpected compliment, oftentimes accompanied by the word fancy or just simply, oh. And other times, she loved us in ways we couldn't imagine were possible.
I guess I went to Aspen before I had the Fulbright. I went to Aspen for 3 summers as an accompanist. And I met someone there who was really responsible for my career in academia. That person was Carla Floyd, the opera composer. And at the time, of course, he wasn't famous. He was just beginning to write Susanna, I guess. And he was a piano teacher at Florida State. That was what he thought he was supposed to do. And he decided that I would be perfect replacement for him when he got his, whatever it was that he got. Guggenheim, I guess. I said, no, I want to stay in New York and starve and try to be a great accompanist. So he came back a few months later and he said, my job has not been filled. And I thought, well, why not? I'll do it. So that was the beginning of my life in academia.
Good morning. I'm here as a representative of faculty that Phyllis was an integral part of for so many years. It's a little intimidating to represent this faculty in this capacity, but I'm going to rely on my personal connection to Phyllis and hope that those of you that I see as I look around this room who knew Phyllis longer than I did. I got here 31 years ago, and I think that makes me a relative newcomer in Phyllis's life. I see so many people that have such a rich history with Phyllis. I hope we can share some of those stories together after this service. I have to start, in spite of what my notes are telling me, with thanking Laurie for playing that excerpt from Ray Zupko's Masks. That piece, that recording is important to me. My predecessors on that recording in the Western Brass Quintet, and the representation that is of the incredible work they were all doing in the endeavor to advance brass chamber music and create new sounds. And I can't help but relay a story to you that Bob Whaley told me just the other day as I was talking to him about this event. That goes along with the recording that you just heard. When Ray delivered the music to the group and to Phyllis, and they set up their rehearsals, Ray asked if he could come to the first rehearsal. The first person to answer was Phyllis with an emphatic no. It's not time for him to be here yet. And he did not. I think he did come to subsequent rehearsals with notepads full of notes for them. But I'm sure those were all helpful. But wonderful to hear that recording, and what a great way for Phyllis to be here with us in the room. I think it's interesting to consider Phyllis's tenure here as it relates to the development of this school. Phyllis came here in 1966. There was a lot of hiring going on in those days. The university had been Western Michigan College all the way until 1957. The university on the whole was on its way to becoming the research institution that it is today. There was growth, there was excitement, there was potential. There were people here already, Don Bullock, who you just heard on that recording, other influential faculty members, Bob Holmes, Bob Fink. Bob Whaley was hired the same year. Dave Sheldon was hired that year, I think. Right, Dave? Yeah. And there were people here that had plans, that had ideas, that had energy. Bob Whaley told me the other day about twice monthly 2-hour faculty meetings that were idea sessions, that were brainstorming sessions. There was a vitality and an excitement about what was possible here. And Phyllis was in on the ground floor of that and was a real mover and shaker in creating what you see the School of Music at Western Michigan University doing now. There certainly is no question that the esteem of our keyboard area, the esteem of the current faculty, past faculty, has everything to do with Phyllis's influence over the years, all the way up till very recently. The hiring had to be done carefully. The right people had to be brought here. the inspiration to create a program here that was focused on collaboration, indeed had a chamber music focus, came from people like Don Bullock, Phyllis Rappeport, and more, who saw that as a way for this school to distinguish itself in its place in the public universities in the state. It was an incredible foresight, in my opinion, and an amazingly wise thing to do, to focus the program, the performance end of the program on chamber music, and to focus the education delivered here on the undergraduate experience. These remain our strengths and something that distinguishes this program to this day. I think we're in a different kind of culture right now where we are working to maintain what's been developed, but people like Phyllis and the legacy that remains are part of why that's going to be possible and why the faculty now share that energy that was so alive in this department in the 60s. I want to talk about my personal relationship with Phyllis because she was like family to us, as she was to so many of you that I see here. I think one of the reasons I was asked to do this is because there were so many stories. We lived next door to Phyllis for 5 years. Indeed, we bought the house because Phyllis told me to. First person I met on this faculty, because when I arrived here on a rainy night in June of 1989 for my interview, first phone call I got at the Super 8 Motel out there on West Main and Drake. Yes. We do better than that now, by the way. Was Phyllis, and she was ready to pick me up to bring me over here for a rehearsal because she was to accompany my audition recital the next day. Phyllis picked me up, brought me over here, and I thought, what an interesting, charming person. And we played together, and we were playing pretty standard rep. Years later, Phyllis told me that she acquired tendonitis from accompanying the trumpet candidates that year, but not from my repertoire. And at one point in our rehearsal, I had decided that I wanted to play the piccolo trumpet a little bit, and I had this Stanley voluntary that I had played a lot, and I had a lot of very show-offy ornamentation to do in it, and I mentioned to her that I thought I was going to tone it down for this occasion. This was the first time I had ever interviewed for an academic position, and I didn't really want to come across as you know, a trumpet player. And she said, well, let me hear it. So I played it with all of my showbiz ornamentation. She said, you have to do that. You have to. I said, oh, no, I don't. She said, no, you have to. You certainly always knew where you stood with Phyllis. And, you know, the first year we moved here, as it was, and we came here. Sue and I came here with little tiny Laura, who I see standing in the back of the room with little tiny Charlotte, who is my granddaughter. And Phyllis was so helpful to us in those first couple of years. We struggled financially. And then the phone rang one day and she said, the house next to me is for sale, you have to buy it. I said, Phyllis, I don't have any money. She said, you won't need any money, it's cheap. But it's a good house. Okay, we looked at it, we bought the house. We lived there for 5 years. We shared a driveway with Phyllis, and we had a running joke that you had to look both ways when you walked out the side door of the house, because if Phyllis was backing out of the driveway, it was your job to get out of the way. We had a bathroom renovation disaster where we went without having a functional bathing facility in our house for about 2 months. Sue was 8 months pregnant at the time. Driveway and into Phyllis's back door every morning for 2 months to shower. She was always at the piano playing Bach. I'd say, morning, Phyllis. She'd say, morning. I'd go upstairs, take my shower, and then Sue would trundle over with and there was nothing strange about it. There was nothing funny about it. It was family. It was right. That's the personal stuff. I think about Phyllis's legacy here as a faculty member. Brad Wong has spoken publicly, especially since Phyllis's passing, about how we think of her as the ultimate collaborator. She had such a collaborative spirit. She was such a person who brought people together. She did this musically, she did this on a program level. She had big ideas. She was not concerned about obstacles or problems. If the idea was good, anything could be overcome. She brought faculty together in projects that got us out of our individual studios and out of our individual areas and made us work together. That spirit is still alive and well in this building. She continues to support this program in incredible ways. Her generous philanthropy since she retired. Several endowed scholarships are in place, among other things, which will ensure that her influence and her legacy lives on in this program forever. As I got ready to do this, I know there's going to be a lot of overlap in what we say today, and I'm editing my bullet points here as I go, but as I got ready to do this, it was important to me to talk to at least a couple of people who worked with Phyllis longer than I did, and I had a good discussion with Brad Wong, and I had a long discussion with Bob Whaley, who can tell you some stories. And I would encourage you to see Bob Whaley this afternoon. Bob was here with Phyllis at the beginning and reminded me of some performances that were memorable, and particularly a recital that Bob presented at Carnegie Recital Hall in New York in 1976. And it was Bob's recital. But Phyllis was there as his collaborator, as was Don Bullock, who played a piece on the recital. And no less than Robert Sherman of the New York Times reviewed that. Bob sent me a copy of the review yesterday. January 11th, 1976. Of course, Bob's playing was lauded for its beauty and its interpretive skill. And they played a lot of transcriptions. Phyllis and Bob loved to play Mahler, Debussy, songs. Bob transcribed these. Bob and Phyllis collaborated on these. Like so many people who collaborated with Phyllis, Bob immediately commented on how much he learned about this music from Phyllis by playing it with her. But the lead sentence in that, which I will paraphrase for you in that review, is students at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan are certainly getting their tuition dollars worth if the rest of the faculty are of the esteem of the performers that we heard here in Carnegie Recital Hall tonight. And that is Phyllis and Bob and Don Bullock, three people that you just heard in that recording. And that's the legacy that remains here and that lives in the current faculty. And my own story, I also wanted to tell you as I talked to Brad Wong, the same kind of comment. He said, I played the Mozart clarinet concerto with Phyllis for the first time. I learned more about that piece from Phyllis than I ever learned from any clarinet teacher I ever had. One of the famous performances that a lot of people remember who were here in the 70s was Phyllis's performance with Don Bullock of the Hindemith Trumpet Sonata. And when I arrived here on the faculty, I had never played that piece. Oddly, I had never studied it, I had never played it, and when I told Phyllis this, she said, that's not right. We must play it. Okay. So we played it. A faculty recital was planned, and I set about to learn the Hindemith Trumpet Sonata. I certainly knew it, but I knew it was a beast to put together with piano, so I was prepared for that. And I had a wonderful time learning that piece. It remains one of my favorite pieces of our repertoire. I think it's one of the best pieces we have. But there was one rehearsal, and the third movement of the Hindemith Trumpet Sonata is called at the beginning Funeral Music. It's a dark, serious piece, unlike so much trumpet music, which is full of happy fanfares. The Hindemith is a serious piece, funeral music, a little bit of darkness, a little bit of anger in certain passages. There's one lyrical passage in the middle of the movement that I just couldn't get my head around. I didn't understand how it fit in. The movement ends with Hindemith's harmonization of the traditional chorale, Alle Menschen müssen sterben, all men must die. This is a dark piece. Beautiful and serious. But there was this beautiful lyrical, sort of darkly lyrical passage in the middle, and I said one rehearsal, Phyllis, I don't understand what to do with this. I don't get this. It doesn't seem to fit the character of this movement. I just don't really understand what it's supposed to be. And she did that thing we just saw, she cocked her head and looked at me as if to say, what? And then she did that little shrug and she said, it's a lullaby for the dead. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I said, yes, of course it is. I've told that story, just as I told you, to every student I've taught. I've coached on the Hymn Sonata in the past 30 years. And indeed, I told it to a student, I'm not making this up, on the Thursday that Phyllis died. I realized when I heard the announcement of her death on Friday that she had been alive in my studio exactly the day before, the day that she died. She's never going to be gone from this place. She's never going to be gone from this school of music. She's alive in our hearts. She's alive in our teaching. She's alive in the hallways and the studios of this building. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
So I got another temporary job at Yale. And that was peculiar. It was not a piano teaching job per se. The director at the time at the music school at Yale thought there should be some kind of course for keyboard majors to learn practical things like sight reading and accompanying, but mostly sight reading. And I said, well, as he further described it, it sounded like sort of ear training. And I said, I'm really not trained to do that. Am I the right person? Yes, you're the right person. So I went. I had a great time those 2 years. I didn't know what to do with those kids. We sang with a lot and played duets, and they got a little better at what they were supposed to do. But I had a good time playing with folks in and out of Yale. Probably the most musically fascinating thing that I did in those 2 years, I did a lot of good things, was learn to know the Krosnick family, which includes Joel Krosnick, who played cello in the Juilliard Quartet for a very long time until he recently retired. He was then finishing high school. I was about 10 years older than he. And I played his, whatever, senior recital or whatnot. We used to go to the family often because they had chamber music all the time. The father was a doctor who played violin or viola, I guess, and invited people on a regular basis to come to the house and play. So that was a wonderful experience. His brother was a very good violinist who wound up in Florida somewhere teaching.
Phyllis was such an important friend to so many people. She was my first musical friend in Kalamazoo. Within 1 day of my arrival here in 1972 to become concertmaster, my phone rang. Phyllis had tracked me down. She said that I should come over and bring some music. We read through some Mozart sonatas and then a Beethoven romance that I had performed recently. When Phyllis liked something musically, after the last note, she would look up, raise her eyebrows, put a smile on her face, and say, From that first meeting on, I always hoped for that reaction. Phyllis was a violinist's dream as a collaborator. She possessed a unique sensitivity to the way a violinist's bow works. And she also knew how to balance the volume between a big grand piano's hundreds of strings against a little 4-string violin. We performed recitals in the old Oakland Recital Hall, in Stetson Chapel, in churches, synagogues, for holidays, weddings, services. Our rehearsals were always a very special experience. I would go to her lovely little gingerbread house on Arlington Street. The cats would curl up on a chair for their serenade. Time would fly by, magic would happen, and with very few words, the music would emerge seemingly by itself. As I think back on our recitals together, one piece, the great C major fantasy for violin and piano by Schubert, stands out. Phyllis loved Schubert, but the C major fantasy has such a difficult piano part that even famous pianists refuse to perform it. It starts and ends with a tremolo effect that's hard to accomplish on modern pianos. But Phyllis was undaunted. We ended up giving multiple performances of it over the years, for which I am forever grateful. I remember her beautiful solo playing. Phyllis played with a personal, recognizable character that distinguished her as an artist. Always a lovely tone, never harsh. With lyrical phrasing and clearly delineated expression, she had a unique projection of attitude and body language that emphasized where the music was going. I respected her artistry, but initially we did have some occasional differences. Coming out of Yale, I was always taught to keep a strict tempo, avoid rubato, that is slowing down and speeding up. Phyllis had a natural inclination to move ahead in passages of rising excitement and to slow down toward the end of phrases to release the tension. Phyllis, I feel, I learned from her the expressive beauty of that kind of rubato. I'm sure many of you noticed that Phyllis had opinions, especially about pianos. You can imagine my distress when I had asked Phyllis to play an out-of-town wedding and the church's piano turned out to be a low-end Casio electronic piano. Bach, Schubert, and Massenet on a Casio? Well, during the ride back to Kalamazoo, I apologized for the instrument. And Phyllis, who certainly had an opinion regarding that piano, kindly said nothing about it. Most of all, Phyllis was a remarkable teacher. She adopted a number of fine young string students, playing their accompaniments for them, but also coaching them. We had fun in lessons working together with these students. The young players included Joanna Steinhauser, Jacqueline Hansen, Sing Sing Nordmo, and others. They blossomed into fine violinists and became exceptional musicians, partly through working with Phyllis. In hearing of Phyllis's passing, Sing Sing Nordmo wrote the following. Ms. Rappeport will forever be an inspiration to me, and she always not only showed me the discipline it takes to be a musician, but how gratifying and fulfilling it can be to live a life devoted to music. From the time I started studying with her, she taught me with kindness, but with a firm and unmoving standard for everything that I played, from the simplest etude to the most complex Chopin ballade. But beyond playing the piano, she taught me what it means to be an artist, to see music as the emotion and the ideas beyond the notes on the page. It was never just about the technique, it was about creating sound that was impactful and had meaning. I will always remember her as the inspiring force that she was, and hope to become the musician and the person she always believed I could be. Finally, Marie Freudenberg, her piano student, wrote, I hardly know where to start when I think about Phyllis and how much she meant to me. What I keep coming back to, though, is a quote by D.T. Suzuki that she had taped onto her piano. I looked at it at every lesson, but only now fully realize and treasure what it meant to me. It said, teaching music is not my main purpose. I want to make good citizens. If children here find music from the day of their birth and learn to play it, they develop sensitivity, discipline, and endurance. They get a beautiful heart. Marie closes by saying, if I have a beautiful heart, I owe a lot of it to Phyllis. Thank you.
myself, and I won't go into any details, in Princeton, hired to teach at the New School for Music Study, which was a creation of Frances Clark, great pedagogue, piano pedagogue. Very strong woman, surrounded herself with acolytes. When I had my interview, I said to her, Frances, I don't think I'm the right person. You want people who do your bidding, I understand, and I'm not good at that. You're just what we want. New blood. Okay, I didn't have a job. Oh, yes, I did.
It's hard to put into words just how much Phyllis meant to me, and I'm sure to the countless students who had the privilege of knowing her and calling her their teacher. I started taking lessons with Phyllis when I was just 12 years old. I have a vivid memory of going to her house the first time and playing for her. I was young and naive, and I had no idea how scared I probably should have been. Instead, I marched up her miniature sidewalk, through her miniature door, and into her miniature house, and sat down at the only thing in that miniature house that was not miniature, her beautiful grand piano. I stumbled through a waltz from one of those classics for students books, which I had taught myself to play. And I'm sure now that it was not actually very good, but thankfully, Phyllis saw something in me that it took me many more years to see in myself. I think that's what Phyllis did best as a piano teacher. She saw potential in those who didn't always see it in themselves. And I think perhaps her very strong opinions and fearlessness in speaking her mind came from always wanting each student she worked with to live up to their potential. If she was ever disappointed in you, it was only because she wanted you to do as well as she believed you could do. She was passionate about teaching and helping her students become confident not only in their music making, but in life. I owe so much of my musical development to Phyllis, but she also played such an important role in helping me become a strong and confident young woman, unafraid to tackle new challenges. I couldn't reminisce about being a student of Phyllis's without talking about time spent with fellow students of hers. Elizabeth, Catherine, Ksenia, Oliver, Glenn, Cassandra, and so many others. About once a month, Phyllis would host us for an afternoon of sharing the music we were working on. Friday Club became a fairly regular occurrence, and she would of course fill us up with hot apple cider and Anna's cookies. Of course, preparation for these afternoons didn't just involve making sure you could play your music. There was always some kind of music theory test, handwritten in her incomparable cursive. And probably some ear training, most likely to help us prepare for upcoming events like the dreaded Achievement Day. And sometimes there might even be questions related to the composers who wrote our pieces. If you didn't know the answer, you could count on Phyllis to make one of her traditional sounds. I could never do that justice. After hearing one of those, you didn't dare show up to your next lesson without being armed with every piece of knowledge about that composer and your music that you could possibly find. Though I do remember one time having to explain to her that I had found most of my information by Googling the composer. And I think that in itself earned one of those sounds as well. Perhaps more out of intrigue than disappointment. When you got one of her musical questions correct, you could always count on hearing the coveted, "Go to the head of the class." Oh. A compliment that could boost your confidence for days, or at least until she heard you stumble through a B-flat harmonic minor scale. At which point you probably heard something more along the lines of, "Put it away and don't get it out again until you can do it right." As a teenager, those quizzes and tests and questions stressed me out to no end. But now as a music teacher myself, I realize how lucky I was to have a teacher like Phyllis who cared about those aspects of my musical development. We may have all had our stereotypical lazy teenager moments and not recognized how important all that stuff really was, but she persisted in making us practice and listen, think and analyze and write, which in turn made us better musicians and better equipped to tackle the many academic and professional paths we all chose in the years that followed. I spent so many hours in that tiny living room at that giant piano, from weekly lessons to those monthly Friday club meetings and even a few cat-sitting residencies while Phyllis was visiting family and friends on the East Coast. It's also where I made my college audition recordings with, as Phyllis referred to it, the truth machine. Looking back now, Phyllis and her truth machine helped me not only get into college, but to make the obvious correct choice in selecting a music school to attend, Western Michigan University. She never pushed me toward a specific college. In fact, she was the one that got me to apply other places when I was convinced all along Western was the place for me. But I think she was very happy to know that I would be in the hands of so many of her former colleagues, who she had developed such incredible artistic relationships with, and who she also cared about deeply as friends. I did not spend nearly the hours at the piano that I spent as a student of Phyllis, or while a student here at Western, but I do spend a lot of time making music with children. Whether it's teaching piano lessons or singing with my elementary school music classes, I try my hardest to look at each student as more than just a musician, much like I feel Phyllis did for me. I recently took a giant leap of faith and moved to a new state to begin a new job. Shortly before departing on this adventure, I was able to speak with Phyllis, and her encouragement and joy in seeing me expand my world helped to give me the boost of confidence I needed in what was quite a nerve-wracking move. Just a few days before she passed away, I was able to speak with her again. I caught her up on all that had happened since my move, and her call was well-timed as I was going through a particularly stressful time in a new job. But her questioning and quizzing and curiosity reminded me why I had made the move in the first place and why, despite feeling stressed, it was the right move. She alluded then to slowing down, but of course didn't provide any details, instead choosing to focus on wanting to know every detail of my new life, along with asking about my siblings, my parents, and even my grandmother and aunts who she had met on so many occasions. It was very like Phyllis to care more about others than to give any details about her own life. I feel so incredibly blessed that Phyllis took me on as a piano student all those years ago, and that even once I moved on to college, grad school, and teaching jobs, she cared enough to keep in touch and valued what I was doing, even when it wasn't tied directly to playing the piano. Phyllis was a tremendous teacher, but more than that, she was a marvelous human being who cared deeply about her students, her community, her family, and her friends. Her genuine curiosity about each person she met and interacted with is something I think we could all try to do more of in our own lives. May we all invest in as much energy and passion into the communities and people in our lives, just as Phyllis did. Thank you.
I used to have a habit of asking pianists if they'd like to play duets, because it's just the greatest thing. It's the pianist's favorite music, if you will. And Curtis never responded, so I stopped asking him. Then one day, we were asked to play a duet for a convocation. I think it was a Schubert piece. Well, we were practicing. One day, he turned to me and he said, "This is just like chamber music." I said, "Well, I've been telling you that for a long time, but you didn't believe me." So we proceeded. And a day or two later, he said rather sheepishly, I got us a date to play a concert in the recital hall. I said, fine. Well, that was the beginning of great things, because we played a recital. There were, I don't know, some standard pieces, Mozart, and I don't remember what else, in the first half. And the second half was our forthcoming signature piece, The Rite of Spring. And that was itself an experience I'll never forget. Maybe the most significant musical experience of my life. We started out playing it as a four-hand piece, the way Stravinsky wrote it. He later, of course, orchestrated it. And Curtis had the orchestral score on the ground, on the floor. And he'd constantly look at it and say, well, the bass clarinet plays a C there. We ought to play that. No, it's not in the score, in the piano score. And he kept finding notes and phrases and things that he thought we should incorporate. So pretty soon we were playing it on two pianos instead of one, because there were so many new notes. So that kept happening. And one day I said to him, you know, we ought to go down to Champaign-Urbana and play this to Sulima Stravinsky, Igor's son, who was on the piano faculty at Illinois and whom I knew from my graduate time there. Okay, so we drove down to Illinois in my unheated Volkswagen in winter, froze to death. Played it for Sulima, and he was charmed. He kept encouraging us. You know, I'd worried to him about all the extra notes, and no. He loved it. So we had his blessing, and we drove back, freezing to death. And we played that piece a lot, eventually recording it. And that
well-planned words don't fit necessarily into that wonderful performance, absolutely wonderful performance. So I hope you can make the mental adjustment to just some vignettes that I've prepared to share with you of my memories of my friendship with Phyllis. In 1970, we, that is my children and myself, my children Janet and William and their father Neil Sanders, who took the position at Western as a French 1 professor. And we arrived in Kalamazoo from England on the 25th of August, 1970. And so on the 25th of August of this year, I would have known Phyllis 50 years. We were certainly very naive to the differences between our cultures and how they would affect our lives in a new country. Of the many new acquaintances who kindly helped us, Phyllis was extraordinary. She helped us in the most gentle and caring and non-intrusive way that was incredibly helpful. I've taken just a random pick of a few of these memories that come back to me since her death. It was Phyllis who made the connection that helped us hear about 175 acres of land and an old house on the lake, which we ultimately bought. Coming from the depths of London to Dalton was an extraordinary experience and enabled us to make radical changes in our lives. Thank you, Phyllis. It was Phyllis who, with others, introduced us to new friends, many of whom have been long time over those last 50 years. Thank you, Phyllis. It was Phyllis who very gently informed me that I could not go around talking about buying rubbers, but rather they must be called erasers. When buying stationery for my children's first day at school. Thank you, Phyllis. And it was Phyllis who, upon finding I wrote dates with the day, month, and year, rather than the month, day, and year as here, asked if I had reported my children's dates of birth accurately upon registering for school. No, I had not. Phyllis asked me, and oh no, I said, I must tell them, because my son will be older than they think he is. Phyllis asked me if he was doing well, and I assured her he was. Then she said very firmly, leave the issue alone. They might even take him out as being too young. Let it be. I did, and all was perfectly fine. Thank you, Phyllis. Many, many more memories that I will keep for the rest of my life. It was Phyllis who subtly weaned me into a more eclectic choice for listening to music at home, and not forever only choosing pieces with French horn solos. I enjoyed discussing music with her enormously, attending opera broadcasts from the Met, and also bird watching, which we did together. We had a little race as to which of us would see the first Baltimore Oriole in the spring. Thank you, Phyllis. And as with every friendship, some are stronger than others, but together we found a balance and affection which continued to the end. Thank you, Phyllis. Thank God you lived your life in your own home with no need for long-term care. You continued control of your life to the very end. You did it on your terms. Very well done, Phyllis.
Of course, it's a tremendous honor to have been asked not only to open the program, but on the other hand, to come after all of that is something of a challenge. And I think I have the program here, and through the 23rd Psalm, I had Phyllis's face looking up at me, and I found that rather difficult. And so I think I'm going to just, if she'll forgive me, turn her face down for the moment. This is the El Maleh Rachamim, God full of mercy, which is the traditional Jewish prayer for funerals. Many of you will know or have heard of the Mourner's Kaddish, which is a spoken thing, but this is really the prayer for the dead, and I want to give you the English before I chant it in the Hebrew. I also, since I am the last, I want to just remind everybody that there is a reception afterwards in the Richmond Center atrium, which you will all know better than I where that is. And I also just want to say to Phyllis, you told me when I left for Jerusalem 5 months ago that I was under no circumstances to come back if anything happened. And I'm so glad I didn't listen. So in English, God, full of mercy, who dwells in the heights, grant perfect peace under the wings of your feminine indwelling spirit. In the heights, the holy, pure heights that illuminate the heavens, grant this peace to the soul or the spirit, the life force of Phyllis, daughter of Philip and Hilda, who has gone to her world. And may that world be in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, which for her no doubt would involve a lot of music. And may she be bound up in the bond of life. May God, however we understand that word, be her portion. And may she rest in peace in her place. And when I come to the end, I'll invite you to say amen with me.